Hi, Phil. It's great to see you again. It's great to have you back on one of these fireside chats. It's been a little while, but absolutely, lots and lots has been going on within the MIS market for sure.
Indeed.
So it's good to have you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, you too. I think one of the things I really wanted to talk to you, and it sort of follows on really from the last two fireside chats. So as I mentioned, lots been going on within the MIS market. And it might be worth just having a bit of a reflection on where the market is now, because I think, there's lots obviously been going on with ESS. There's, you've got the sort of people leading the charge regarding the challenges. And also, actually, we started to, if you really want to look into the market, there are also some new potential entrants into this market space. So I think it'd be quite interesting to start from there, if that's okay.
Sure.
And also there is some obviously changes in the landscape happening like with Northern Ireland, so that'd be interesting as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most significant of them all.
Yeah, well, in which case then why don't we start there? So Northern Ireland at the moment is absolutely, they're going out to tender. So they're looking for a new 10-year contract with a potential new MIS solution, along with obviously it's a wider service than that, and obviously there will be primaries going in first of all. Where do you see Northern Ireland at the moment?
I think they've got a very difficult set of decisions to make, and that's probably why they haven't made that decision just yet. I think they're waiting to see which solution will be successful, because although there has been a change in market share, obviously a fall with the ESS and rise of Bromcom and oh God, the name escapes me. Arbor, sorry. It's a long time since I've had a chat. But Northern Ireland, it's a government-controlled initiative. They can't afford to fail, and they're going to need a lot of heavyweight investment behind it before they make a decision. So typically, they tend to wind up all the internet services along with everything else. So it'll unquestionably be a partnership, and so some very large company has got to make a commitment to one of the existing players. I think it's highly unlikely that they'll go with a new player. The record in this country is actually quite poor with people coming in. If you take Graham Reed, was it Aspen he tried to bring in? He was very enthusiastic about it, and it failed. There was Power School, which is huge in the States. It's had several little knocks on the door, but never really got its feet under the table. I was speaking to somebody, surprising enough, at my gym, actually, who's a chief finance officer, not of an MIS company, but an Edtech company. And she was saying that they'd given up trying to sell in the UK, and they're actually having much more success in the United States. And the reason for that is because the number of buying points in the UK is just enormous, which actually just make the Northern Ireland contract very interesting indeed, because it won't be a framework contract. My guess is the contract, for example, with West Sussex is probably a framework contract. It probably isn't we bought it on behalf of all our schools. So although you're on the framework, you've still got to persuade all the schools that you have the right solution. And clearly with your local authority behind you, you've got more chance of achieving that, but it's still hard graft. Northern Ireland were the most demanding customer in the best possible way that I experienced. And anybody that wins that contract, it'll be a big and very lucrative contract, I'm sure, but they will have their work cut out because they've got to supply solutions to voluntary grammar schools and to state schools, and very complex use of SIMS. So although I wouldn't suggest that all schools in Northern Ireland are using the depth of SIMS, the team at the centre believe in the depth. And so a solution coming out at the moment without that depth, I think will be in a difficult position. But Northern Ireland will have to make a decision this time. It kicked it into the long grass last time because there were no alternatives. I can't see them kicking it into the grass again.
Do you think, in some cases, so this is, I'm not sure about this, but ultimately with all what's going on in England, we're in the sense of the challengers are trying to take market share. Do you think then actually in some cases Northern Ireland might be a bit of a distraction for the two main challenges, the Arbors and the Bromcoms? Or do you, and in which case then, is that difficult for them, or is it more difficult for Northern Ireland to sort of go, actually, will we get what we need?
I think that the process that Northern Ireland will go through will be quite thorough. I think if you win Northern Ireland, you will have at least a partner in there that is driving you in the right direction. And so you could say it's a distraction, but in actual fact, it's a friendly face that knows exactly what is required. So if I was at Arbor or Bromcom, I would want to win that for sure. I wouldn't describe it as a distraction, but the revenue you get from Northern Ireland, it's quite big, but the demands, you've got a separate set of returns, you've got separate financial requirements. Actually, the financial requirements might have dropped away because I don't know what's happened, but they were quite keen on introducing Oracle, I think it was, or SAP.
Yeah, you're right.
So that requirement might have dropped away, which would make life a lot easier. But you've still got invoicing for fees in the voluntary grammars that will have to tie itself up to whatever financial system they've got. Because I doubt very much if they'll have managed to put fees billing into Oracle or SAP.
No, I think you're absolutely right. There will definitely be a need for fees billing in the requirements. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because like you say, you're going to have to work with a primary bidder. So something like it was Northgate last time, which is now Capita. And I'm sure they will bid in again, because they're the incumbent.
Yes.
There is also, I think last time there was HP, Fujitsu. So, so that
RM at one point.
Sorry?
RM at one point.
So my understanding is I think there's definitely, there's definitely more than two anyway. And obviously there would need to have a successful tender process.
That's right.
So I think, so it sounds like whoever is in the MIS world wants to win, then they're going to have to work on one of those primaries, which I think always makes it a little bit more interesting anyway, because you're relying on the primary to bid in successfully your bid, I guess.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. I mean, even when we were Capita, you still had one wing of Capita opposite the other wing of Capita, which does lead to tensions, because the service provider wants to provide the best possible service, and if the software provider lets them down in any way, there's an internal row. So it's not an easy relationship for any stretch of imagination.
No, I agree. And who do you think is best fitted to win that potentially?
I'm too remote from that. I know which one I would choose in terms of business practice, but I don't know what's the best solution.
Yeah, well, whoever wins it, that's a mighty big market share as well. So 1,200 schools.
Yeah, very much so. Yes, very much so.
A good win. And what about Wales then? So if we're going to go obviously through the countries as well. So Wales, so at the moment, do you see any major changes happening in Wales? Any movement?
Well, I haven't been looking, in all honesty, so I'm not sure. Has the internally produced software taken off?
No, Teacher Centre. I think they actually just lost Carmarthen. I think is one of those, but they lost a little while ago. But I think there are because they've now moved to these sort of consortiums. So there's a Northern Consortium. I think there is an element where I think there's potential for movement. But again, I suppose the pain point comes back to, like you said, with Northern Ireland, which is you have to meet and again another set of requirements. The one thing Wales always wants to be is
very much so. And I mean, if I can say, the problem with Wales, I'm sort of risking everything here, but the language requirement is a non-trivial example. You've also got a completely different set of requirements in terms of building the statutory returns. So in both Northern Ireland's case and in Wales's case, the distraction, if you like, is supporting those returns, and schools rely on those returns for their funding, so you cannot afford to get it wrong. Clearly, it's a lot easier if you're in the cloud. If you make a mistake, you can correct it probably before most people have noticed it. But nevertheless, the engineering required to produce those different returns well, certainly when I was at Sims, it was a significant amount of expenditure. Yeah.
It is. I think we'll move on to England as well, and where we are at the moment. But obviously in some ways the strength, if you're going to try and move into Wales, is if you can get traction, then they're still purchased by the local authority rather than
very much so. Very much so.
So that's quite useful. I think the other thing that's coming up, I think in Wales, is I think the hub, so the HWB, yes, are looking at building a framework out. So that might actually give more or make the market a bit more open than where it currently stands at the moment, which might be quite useful.
Are they actually trying to build an MIS themselves?
No, no, definitely not. But they're looking to build a framework to say, here are the 1 or 2 or 3 different sort of suppliers that we recommend that meet the Welsh needs. Yeah, I think that's
I
the
see
key.
What you mean. Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So then there's obviously England and where that market is at the moment. So that at the moment is, there's so much change. Yeah. So much change. So I think since we last spoke, and I think at that point, I think ESS was being bought, or they were already buying Sims, as it were, at that point in time. So now, obviously, they've purchased Sims. So Parent Pay now have it within their umbrella of their portfolio. So, what have you seen in the market so far? What's been going on? What do you think is happening at the moment with ESS?
Well, I think maybe they've made some unwise decisions at ESS. I think the 3-year contract will bite them. I mean, I had dealings with the CMA, and our encounters with them were actually quite positive is the wrong word, but they were productive. But that was because we were very much aware of our market position. I can't help feeling that some of the decisions that have been made by ESS will land them into some difficulty. Certainly, it's not something, if I'd been there, I would have advised them to do, because it does look like, it does look like it's open to challenge, let's put it that way. So in terms of the rest of the market, I mean, it is interesting to see all these players try and come in. I mean, I think the most exciting one I've seen in terms of new players is probably the Ames one. But it is interesting to see Iris with its developments and Juniper with its developments. They've not really, at least in the latest figures I've seen, they've not really grabbed much market share, in spite of the fact that the market is open at the moment to new solutions. And I think this goes to show how difficult it is to sell to lots of individual sites. Ames, I thought was very interesting. I particularly like some of the stuff which wasn't actually included in their MIS. So, for example, I saw it when it was in the middle of lockdown, and the guy had built a really neat conferencing facility for classes. And, you could actually see all the class members. You could turn them off and turn them on in terms of being able to speak. And it was very integrated into the data for the classes. Now, a solution like that, I think, is exciting, but you're not going to do that unless you've got somebody big behind you. And as far as I'm aware, they've not done that. Had I been ESS, I think I'd have knocked on Ames's door and said, I think you've got an interesting solution here. Can we work together? Because it's the only one I've seen that is different. Yeah. Everything else I've seen is Me Too, i.e. it's Sims, but with prettier interfaces and simpler to use. Have I seen anything new? Not really. I remember seeing Arbor once announce something as brand new that you'd introduced in Sims 10 years ago. This is not revolutionary. It's a great shame that 8 never made it out through the door, because I think it did have some things that got around the competition concerns and gave schools a very flexible solution. But unfortunately, that's gone.
Yeah, I'm with you with the innovation. I think it's really, and probably understandably so, everybody was trying to challenge Sims. So the best thing to do is try and fulfill all the functionality needs that Sims is doing first of all, before you start becoming more innovative. And Sims, let's face it, and I think everybody probably will sees it, is a very rich functional solution. And actually to meet all the needs, which is effectively what we had to do, all the needs of all schools in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, it had to be rich, because obviously they all have, they all prioritise different parts of the system. So in some ways, we had to make it that rich in those days.
The sort of thing that I thought the Sims 8 had got, which was quite exciting, if you take the lesson monitor aspect of Sims, it was a tack-on, and it had to be sold separately because of competition concerns and so on. But the re-engineering of 8 actually unified the solution of taking lesson registration with statutory AM and PM. But more than that, it because the solution was so slick, it actually made it possible to do clubs as well within exactly the same software. And then linking in the comms side of things, because it was a unified solution for all events, you could actually grant permission to owners of those groups to email and text people. And it was, it's that sort of innovation that may or may not be in the new solutions, but I think we were constrained by competition concerns for a long time. And we couldn't find our way out of it because we had built separate solutions. Whereas building a unified solution, actually the competition concerns drop away because you have produced something which doesn't require extra investment. And if you take that solution, some of the more smart people that used to work for us, they'd actually extended that to recording inventories and things of that sort, because they're all the same thing when it comes down to it. And that sort of innovation is what I think is required. But of course, at the moment, I think everybody's just trying to get market share. So I think they're basically replicating the mistakes that were in Sims 7.
Or because their solution, most of the solutions are now over 10 years, aren't they? Yes, so most of the other solutions out there are
no, that's very, very true. Ames is probably the exception to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because like EdGen is effectively iSAMs. Yes. And rebranded and a few changes, I know, to meet the needs of the English market, but ultimately it's still a relatively old system. Well, 5 years plus, I would imagine. Yes. Most of them are.
Oh, at least.
So with EdGen, where do you think? Because they've supposedly won 40 schools in the last few months, or the first half of this year. So do you see them being a challenger, or do you think it's too hard?
40 schools. You can't carry on with 40 schools.
No, but there is movement.
Oh, good. I mean, I've got a lot of time for the guys that are at Iris, but you can't run a profitable business with 40 schools. Now, clearly, they've got the whole independent sector, which probably they're growing that because of Sims' failure to get into the cloud. So I'm sure that the people at Iris are seeing revenue growth in the independent sector, but 40 schools it used to cost capita, was it £1 million for all of the statutory returns across England, Wales, and Northern Ireland?
Yeah, absolutely. 800,000.
It may well be that you can be much more efficient with better structures and so on, but it's still a sizable commitment. You're not going to pay for that with 40 schools. You need thousands of schools, and so if I was a school manager, I would not be buying into any solution that had 40 schools. I just wouldn't. You've only got to look at what happened with the schools that bought into Graham Reed's solution. They bought into it, used it for a year, liked it, but because there was no growth in the market, Aspen just came out of the market. And MIS systems are absolutely crucial to running schools, absolutely crucial, and probably in ways that that many schools don't appreciate. So I mean, the example I've got in my head is when I went to the primary school that recorded book bans in Sims assessment. and did a quick column calculation and realized, they got about 15 children across the school of 300 that were reading below their age, and they were able to put interventions in, because you can do that on a spreadsheet, of course you can, but the fact is that if everything's all together, you can use that information very effectively.
No, I'm with you. I think that actually, in some ways, where the innovation has come from is that machine learning piece, of using that data appropriately.
Yes, and nobody, even in Sims 8, we didn't manage to get machine learning in there, which is a great shame.
We're rebuilding at the MIS or in its entirety, so I think.
Well, indeed. But maybe machine learning might have made that easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and going back to Iris a little bit, so they have, though, PS Financials, which is in about 70 or 67% of academies.
Yes.
You'd hope they'd be able to grow quicker with that sort of market share of finance, selling in MIS.
When I was closer to the market, the thing that schools always said about PS Financials is that it was just so expensive that they actually resented, this per seat licensing. So I don't think Iris has got a particularly good reputation in terms of its costs, its charges, which would put it on the back foot with most academies, I would think, in terms of the financial controller. I remember when we were working to produce a new solution, adapting one of Capita's products, the interest in Capita's solution at that point was high. Now, of course, the sale that went through didn't include that, which was foolish in my view, because I think that solution actually did have legs, and it was working. So although Iris has got, as you say, a very big footprint in academies with its financial product, I don't think the two things are that build upon each other.
So they're not as symbiotic in the sense that you
That's the word I was looking for, sorry.
That's right. Don't worry, I do it all the time.
I'm not used to using my brain, sorry.
Oh, man. Yeah, so I think, so then what about Bromcom? So Bromcom seems to be making a lot of wins at the moment. So they're making a lot of wins in the academies market, but they also just won West Sussex as well. So that's 200 schools. Yeah. Including finance as well.
They're probably, of the solutions around, probably the most full-featured. I strongly suspect they've dissembled Sims completely and know it inside out, because they built their product by replacing all of the Sims modules around the core, and then they replaced the core.
Okay, so then we got Arbor as well. So Arbor at the moment, they're winning. They're getting to the point where they definitely utilising the support teams, which is good. Yes. To basically help them sort of migrate, and so they're definitely trying to. So I think there's an element of emulating what you achieved in Sims, really, which is to sort of create much bigger communities. Yes. I guess around the marketplace.
Yes, I think however slick your solution is, however easy it is to use and all the rest of it, schools need to trust you. And the trust that the local support teams have got is second to none, really, particularly in the primary sector. So even when something is simple to use, people need hand-holding and need to be shown what it can do. So it's all very well having a very slick assessment solution, but most schools don't have the time to invest to see how that works. And so therefore, the support units provide that vital role of making something real in a school. And I don't think I would be attempting to bypass them. I mean, it always looks very attractive on paper to bypass local support. Oh, I've got all that local support money, which I can have for myself. I don't think that works like that. I think the local support teams, as long as they're good, I mean, some teams were quite weak, but a lot of the teams were very, very strong and had very, very good relationships with their schools. Even the weaker support units had good relationships with their schools, and it was more to do with the lack of investment in the local authority that led to their weakness. So I think the support units are something which you need to embrace, and as you say, Arbor has done that.
Yeah, I think there will definitely be, especially after what's happened with ESS, which we can come on to in a minute. But there will definitely, I think they'll consolidate into smaller, in a number of sport teams. There'll probably be more of the commercial ones. The SCOMASes of the world, Indeed. The Osmoses of the world, the SBSs. I think because now, especially now, with the contract moving away, going directly to schools from ESS perspective, I think some of those smaller sport teams just won't be a viable solution anymore.
No.
But yeah, definitely embracing the local authority is important. So then there is Juniper. So Juniper at the moment, they obviously bought Pupil Asset, but I'm not seeing much of movement in the market. I don't know about you.
No, I mean, it's quite interesting. Juniper are very acquisitive, and they bought some products which probably have got a long-term revenue behind them. The trouble is that they bought disparate assessment systems, and as far as I can see, they've not tried to bash them together. Probably the expense of doing it is one thing, but also you've then got a user base that you've got to move, and in terms of the target tracker. That's actually several thousand schools, and to move those on to probably the better solution, which is probably cloud, is it? They'll probably end up spending a fortune on trying to consolidate. So I'm not entirely certain what their strategy is, and that might explain why they haven't grown very much. So they've obviously had a few wins. And they're clearly strong in Norfolk, and I can't remember what the other county was, but it's not a big, sorry,
Lincolnshire, maybe.
Yes, I think you might be right. Yeah, but it's not big enough to really justify the expenditure. And if you go back to the difficulty in selling to lots and lots of small units, I think Juniper demonstrates how difficult it is to come into this market. So Compass coming in from Australia, I think they've got a mountain to climb, and the first thing that they've got to do is adapt it so it can deal with the requirements of this country. And the second thing they've got to do is prove that they're here for the long term. So that means they've got to bump along with a few schools at great expense for quite a number of years. You've only look at how long it has taken Arbor and Bromcom to get any sizable chunk. I mean, up until just recently, Arbor was losing money. I haven't seen their latest accounts, but I can't imagine that they're particularly rosy.
I really don't know. They must. I assume they are definitely now. So they've got quite a few thousand schools now, I think.
Yes, but the expense in running that, so if you multiply it all up, you need quite a few thousand schools in order to make any money. And so I think new entrants, I think it's hard, very hard.
Yeah, it's interesting about Compass. I think because they've obviously got a great footprint in Australia and in Ireland as well. So they've got some referenceability, which is useful. But I agree. I think the English market is definitely harder sometimes to enter than.
And Scotland is, I imagine, still closed because they have the local authority solution that they were providing for their schools at Tuppence Halfpenny. And it's very difficult to beat something that's that cheap.
However, even with Scotland, I think there is an opportunity, but you're going to have to go at government level and sort of and put a really strong case together. Yes. And it won't be quick. It will be a long buying process, that's for sure.
Well, in Scotland, you've got a much more 1980s attitude. So local authorities are king. They make all the decisions, and therefore the buying decisions are easier because if you convince one local authority, you've got a large number of schools. But they also employ a team, and the attitude towards going private in local authorities is probably not as it is in England.
True. The only thing I will always say about Scotland is at some point they have to recognise that you can't have a system which is, because the last tender, my understanding, didn't work. You sort of go, well, you've got such an old system there now. you can't surely. It's the same with everything. It's like I talk about with EdTech full stop and the education market. You can't hold back. We're educating the future adults. If we're using the oldest tech in the world, that's not a great place to be as a sort of behavior breeds behavior.
In order to invest, you've got to understand what the benefits are. And if you've not had an MIS which is improving learning outcomes, then it's pretty low down the list of things you want to invest in. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I haven't seen much change over the last 30 years. Other than that, that Phoenix got pushed out.
No, absolutely. So going back to ESS then, so obviously there's lots of things happening. So they put a 3-year contract in. The contract is directly now with the schools rather than through the local authority. They have had challenges with the CMA. That includes with the way that the pricing of finance and SIM and the MIS is bundled together. Do you think they're making the right decisions? I suppose first of all, in relation to that, what do you think the impacts are as well?
I think they could have created a rod for their own backs with the 3-year contract. Certainly, when we were dealing with the OFT and then the CMA, the amount of very senior management time it took up was considerable, and the potential of getting a fine, 10% of group turnover, which in this case would be probably the PE house rather than parent pay. You're talking about a very hefty fine if you have broken their rules. I mean, clearly a decision by the CMA can be challenged, but you are talking about large cost and huge distraction. So in terms of, I can see why they did it, and in some ways it's actually quite a smart lateral piece of thinking. But I think it could tie themselves up for quite some time. They did have an easy get out of jail card. That's probably the wrong way of putting it, but a get out of jail card with the finance solution, because it was always available as a single site individual purchase. And if that's still available, then I can't see that they would be breaking any competition concerns on that.
You're right. I think the trouble is it's the jump to singles. If they kept the finance piece at maintained licensing levels, so it almost around £90 per school. Then, if you did move on to an MIS, then I think that's sensible. But the trouble is, as soon as you decide to move your MIS, then you can't then be on the local authority license. No. And so it jumps so much, it goes back up to £3,000 just for FMS. So you then get this first year. Sorry,
schools have got a very unrealistic idea of how much software should cost.
Sure.
And when I say unrealistic, I mean in terms of what the commercial sector has to pay. And if you look at what schools are paying for Iris, £3,000 seems like a bargain. So I think they'll have got a lot of things to point at that suggest that their pricing is not unreasonable. But we'll just have to see.
Yeah, so I agree. Obviously, all finance products, if you went to any of them, it would be more expensive. I do know of some local authorities who are saying keep hold of your license, but still move to another MAS, which means you might not even see some of the change, immediately regarding the movement of different schools.
No, I think that's true, and I can see that there would be competition concerns around there. But we'll just have to see what the CMA have to say. I certainly wouldn't want to be sitting in Bedford or wherever it is these days, having to deal with the CMA on this issue.
No, I agree. I think there's the thing is, there's been lots of different decisions. So there's lots of decisions to unpick in relation to the CMA, I guess. I think they've also, even though it sounds like their conference went really well the last couple of days.
Yes, no, I was watching on the internet some of the feedback, and I think Paul Featherstone needs to be congratulated for getting the feedback he has. It's very, very impressive feedback. So I mean, obviously, my heart is still with all the people that I used to know that are still there, and I do hope they come through all this. There's a good bunch of people that work there, and they want to do the best for their customers.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%, 100%. So where do you see the future? So at a moment, so I'm going to give you an insight. So I spoke to Richard Harley, and we both sort of went, I think ultimately they're obviously, there's no doubt about it. The next set of census data will show that basically there's definitely a drop, a quite significant drop in the number of schools that are with ESS. I think, and in 3 years' time, so 4 years' time, sorry, after the last year of the 3-year contract, my personal view is I think it will go down to about 45%. And I think that's where it's going to be.
I mean, when I left Capita, my prediction was that they'd be down to 50% by now. They've actually done better than that, I think. I left, frankly, because I was disappointed at the rate at which the engineers were producing Sims 8. I just didn't want to sit there and see the decline. So I can't say I'm surprised at the figures that you're quoting.
Yeah. I think that's probably where it will be. I think obviously then the two main challenges as it currently stands, probably Bromcom and Arbor will take a big chunk of that. But I feel like some of the other new entrants will have some of that share as well. So ISAM, Aris will have some of that, and maybe Compass might as well, which will open up the market. Do you think that will then create much more innovation?
No, I think it'll create less. I know that's not the theoretical answer, but I think at the moment it's a race to the bottom in terms of pricing, and I think it's quite difficult to have innovation in a market that's very fragmented. So because the amount of money you've got left over is so small, so I suspect that it will go into a sort of very little change position. So the solution which Arbor is producing today is probably not very different to the one it will produce in 10 years' time, simply because its levels of return are not great enough. So I think conventional wisdom says if you've got a competitive market, you'll get innovation, and you may well get innovation, but the market in the UK is very, very small, and the rest of the world has got solutions in place. So we tried when we were at ESS to go to Australia, but the investment in trying to go out there I can't remember how many schools they got out there now, but it's pitiful. It's absolutely tiny. So the revenue opportunities from expansion are quite limited. Capita used to make quite a reasonable return on its overseas schools, but they were independent schools working as if they were in the UK, and therefore the UK solution suited them without tinkering with it. But if you're going into producing things for other governments, and you've got to give a commitment, because the government is not going to look stupid. It wants to be absolutely certain that it's not going to put something in that fails, and that has happened in Australia. I think it was the northern states put in Oracle, I think it was, and it was a disaster. And of course, it makes the state look poor. So getting your revenue growth through overseas markets is hard work, which comes back to you've got to produce innovation with a relatively small level of income. And so I don't think it will innovate particularly quickly.
Yeah, that's interesting. And actually, I fully understand where you're coming from, especially, I suppose, your previous comments, which I agree with. Schools don't really understand the value of what an MS really can offer. And which means, they do look at it as almost a commodity. So can it do census? Yes, it can. Can you get me my funding? Yes, it can. Brilliant. Fantastic. I'll buy it. Which one's the cheapest? That one. Great.
Yes, you've expressed it far more succinctly than me. Yes, I think it's
that went first.
don't think so. No, I think, yes, it's going to become a commodity market, and it can be based on price. And so I don't think you're going to see the innovation that maybe I'd like to think that at Sims we did produce. Discover, for example, was an example of something that trying to solve a solution. I remember sitting down with you, and you had this problem, and between the three of us, the engineering department, you and me, we came out with a solution which was very different. And it's a shame the technology that it was caught up in made it difficult to implement in schools. But that type of innovation is expensive.
So do you think are we going to go back to where the MIS will be the central piece, and then Wand obviously will do all the integration, but lots of other businesses will start to sort of produce the innovation, where you get more machine learning businesses, as an example, sort of sitting on top?
It's entirely possible. I mean, if the MIS does retreat into being a sort of basic database, then you will get innovation from these smaller companies, which will be more agile. But again, it's difficult for the people like that to grow. I mean, Century is a good example of a company that's been around for a long time, and I don't think it's particularly flying at the moment in terms of uptake, in spite of being promoted extraordinarily well. Yeah.
No, that's true as well. So that there is a lot of strong PR and marketing around Century.
Yes, very, very strong.
Yeah, I agree. So it's going to be quite an interesting market going forward. So do you see any?
Well, it could be quite a depressing market. It could be quite a depressing market.
That was why my next question was going to be: do you see any really strong innovation that's coming out at the moment that you?
Well, the one that I can't remember. We've talked about this before, but Ames. It's for a one or two man band. I think it's done extraordinarily well, and I particularly liked the way in which they'd implemented the conferencing facilities in the classroom activity. So it was possible to have a whole screen full of your pupils, and able to turn them off and on, put their hands up in a way that you can't really do in Zoom or Teams, and if you integrate that type of innovation, and you've got something very good. But who is going to invest in the foot soldiers to go out and sell all of that for I don't know how many years without making any return whatsoever?
Yeah, I think, and unfortunately, you do need to invest in people, because it's not a low touch market. You can't just basically put something out on the web and say, there you go, try it, especially with an MIS.
No, I don't think you can. And you also, I mean, you had the problem at Capita, your engineering base has to grow because you need resilience. There's only so many geniuses in the world that are around. And so you have to supplement the odd genius who tends to want to go off and to do the next thing. You have to supplement the genius with a number of other people that are not working at the same level. And you then find that instead of having one person being enormously productive, you actually end up with a whole team of people having to specify things, having to code them, having to test them, and so on. Whereas when you're starting, you can produce things incredibly quickly because you've got so few people using it that all your errors don't show up.
And it's a scale thing, isn't it? Ultimately, it's a scale thing. You don't have to worry quite so much. You can contact each individual school when you've only got, say, 3 or 4 or 10, and just sort of help them through a problem.
Indeed. I remember the early days when I started to get phone calls myself. I coded in the evening.
Oh, the sport teams always felt they could phone you, even when you had 22,000 schools. No, excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure again, as always, to speak to you about what's happening in the market.
To you too. Yeah. I'm sorry I missed you at Bet. I can't believe I booked a holiday at the same time.
I know, unbelievable. No, we definitely will. Well, we'll definitely catch up soon, I hope.
Yeah, that'd be nice. That'd be good. Anyway,
excellent.
Best of luck, and nice to see you.
Yeah, you too, Phil.